Where to start? Let's start with something we were talking about before, because it's on my mind watching the end again. When he goes through that room and he sees all the things she created for him, or just created in general, I got in mind that this is a movie about death, but it's also about creation. It's about making things, it's about making films, it's about making art. And it left me leaving the theater wanting to create something of my own. So talk a little bit about how it's about death, but also about creating things that last beyond death.
Well, the whole reason to make the movie was to kind of put myself back together. So it was about creation. But I didn't. When you mentioned it earlier, did I really hear it phrased that way? I found it quite maybe touching because you found exactly the right words. Because it is about that. It wasn't about death. It was about life and about leaving something behind. Both what she left behind for him, and she's choosing this moment to. And you realize that she's been an artist all along as well, and that's why one of the many reasons why she got him as well as she did. And it was also about me to leave a film behind that represented who I was at that time, and that also would be a tribute to someone I loved as well. And so it is very much about creation. I don't think I had those exact words in my head going into it, but it is very much about putting yourself together and making something.
I mean, the dedication to your father, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. And it's something that I actually owe a lot to Jeremy, because it wasn't something I led with or talked about openly, really. You don't really to get the job or anything like that. It was about, because I loved the movie and I knew I could make something personal. And I really identified with Greg and his journey. But above all, it was a comedy, and it was a way, but yeah, it was time to me to face this. And deal with it, and by making something, and Jeremy at the very end, I think I tried to bury the name in the end credits, and Jeremy was the first to say you should put it, you should make it the first credit, and then the first time we screened it with that credit was at Sundance, and then that forced me to talk about it because people asked me about it, and that was all part of the journey to kind of now talk about it, so I owe Jeremy quite a lot for that.
Can you talk a little bit, both of you, about because you had a crazy Sundance experience. I mean, we had a crazy one just watching what you guys were going through in that
unexpected,
really all that one day, because I woke up that morning, I'd heard of the film and I wasn't really sure if I had time to see it, and then by the end of that day, it was the only film you should see that day. And then on top of that, you got into this whole bidding war that was like legendary. What do you remember about that experience?
Pieces, fragments.
I can't be more
talking
than
to agents. I think I talked to 3,000 agents that day.
Nothing soothes the creative mind like talking to agents.
It was one of the most beautiful nights of my life. Everything changed that day. I think we talked earlier that we're also exhausted trying to get the movie ready, having screened it for just a couple of, two very small friends and family, then to then screen it for so many people and then have it be received that way. I think Jeremy touched my shoulder during the screening. He was sitting behind me because it was catching, and then you kind of let yourself go.
Yeah, I remember the first. I mean, we had never showed it to a real audience, and we did one screening with maybe 75 people in the Tribeca screening room where we sort of said, I ran into a friend who had high school. It was a high school teacher, and she could bring some people, and he knew someone with some kids, and we sort of cobbled together an audience, and that was the only audience we'd seen. In fact, that day we watched it, and we were like, well, we're going to make some surveys to see if there's any notes. And we sat in the back. We're like, well, we didn't hear a single laugh. And so the whole time I was like, this is a disaster. And then we got the little comments, and everyone said really nice things. And I was like, well, maybe it's because they know us, but we sort of just thought, well, we felt secure with what we had. And Sundance was literally the first time. So 15 seconds in, people were laughing, there was energy, and I was like, okay, I felt that energy before, and I felt...
But so neither of you knew it would blow up that big. I've always wondered when people win big awards like this, how confident they walked into Sundance. Did they know they had it in them?
No. I was sick. I didn't have a voice. I had a fever 2 days before. I was in bed. So I barely got up on stage to introduce it. So it was a complete surprise.
This is the kind of movie that doesn't work with the right Me, Earl, or Dying Girl. So talk a little bit about how you found those three parts.
It was about almost a year of auditioning because the movie came together, then fell apart, then came together again. But Thomas was always a front runner, but Olivia was clearly the Rachel. She had everything. She was funny without trying to be. She was able to sell all the big dramatic scenes without being melodramatic. She had a wonderful quality about her that was quite accessible, And it was then about finding the right match so that the chemistry wasn't sexual, or because it wasn't that movie, or I didn't want people to expect a kiss or that big scene. Even though he tells you, no, it's not this kind of movie, if you have the wrong couple, you'll still expect it or want it or feel disappointed. So, and they had a wonderful connection, and they, over the period of all the auditions and callbacks, they became friends, and you can sense that they were very comfortable with each other. And then R.J. Tyler was it's his first movie. One of the last people I saw, and he submitted a tape. He just moved to LA from Florida, and he had this incredible confidence. And together they made a beautiful, they complemented each other, and they made the perfect trio.
We did not have an Earl, and we were like maybe 3 weeks out from shooting, and we had somebody we wanted to use, but the schedule wasn't working out, and we were like just proceeding with our fingers crossed and auditioning like mad. And this guy's tape showed up, and then you flew back and met him, and Thomas right away said, right after the audition.
He sent me an email saying, I saw I was Skyping with them and saw their audition, but then he sent me an email.
Yeah, well, their chemistry is essential too.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about, one of the things that made me laugh is watching Greg as a filmmaker, that when there are no stakes, he's fine. He can work fast. He doesn't have any issues being creative. But this one time when there are stakes here, and there's something really important, and there's emotions, and it's so critical, and he gets stuck when it means something to him. Was that a little bit of you creeping in as well, or was that?
I don't know. I mean, in hindsight, and as you talk about it, because you're working just emotionally, so But then when you have to talk about it, then you start putting thoughts together, and it all makes sense, but you don't know how much of that was, did you know going into it? But yeah, I feel in a lot of ways I started to find my voice, just the kind of film as a filmmaker, and I think in some ways he's doing the same thing, learning to make something for somebody else and not just for him and Earl. That's a big step. And then learning to find his voice and not relying on the parodies and the sock puppets, and then and he's alone now, without Earl's out. So he finishes this film alone, and how does he do that? How do you pay tribute to someone who gets you, someone who is a true friend, someone who is living a very compressed life, who's going to be gone, maybe be gone quickly, and even though you're in denial, that may happen, and how do you say that? And so it becomes colors and shapes, and it's something a little more abstract. Is the only way to deal with that abstract idea.
It's also the first time he's got an audience, like the other stuff he's made for himself. Yeah.
Yes. And he makes it into a movie theater.
Yeah, right. Can you speak a little bit about filmic influences here? I know you've worked a lot with Ryan Murphy, if that impacted anything. And when I saw the film, I thought of Wes Anderson, not even knowing your involvement, because there's a very tight attention to detail like Wes has in his films, especially in the films within films. So can you speak about filmmakers or films that inspired your work?
Well, the films that I looked at, Ryan Murphy gave me an incredible opportunity to direct. My first directed by credit was Glee, first season. And that means a lot. All of a sudden you can call yourself a director. Because when you're a second year director, which I was also, he was like, well, I did these things, I did that, and no one really knows what you do, and you have to explain it. So now you own it. So he gave me that and an opportunity to experiment quite a bit. Certainly in American Horror Story, you can just do whatever you want. And you push the style. And that was the learning curve. For this one, I learned, I looked at, because I was looking at when I was putting my presentation reel together, I was thinking of Bud Cort as Harold and Maude, and Hoffman as Ben Braddock and Mike Nichols. The Graduate, they were very interesting and very similar in a lot of ways. And then the way the adults are portrayed in those movies was also kind of similar in the way the adults are portrayed. And also how economical those films were. We had 23, 24 days to make the movie. So I knew I didn't want to do a lot of coverage, but I knew I had to. So I saw that Hal Ashby and Mike Nichols, and even though I just learned that Mike Nichols had 100 days to make The Graduate. But you look at the movie, it's quite simple.
Yeah.
And so those are the films that I was looking at more than anything, and really simple, more abstract things like the short films of Charles and Ray Eames, and that was kind of what I was feeling, and obviously that was really what was driving it.
You mentioned the portrayal of the parents, and I was really impressed that all the parents in this are supportive parents. And then a lot of times in movies about teenagers, you know, there's the asshole stepfather, there's somebody it's working against these kids, but here they're all supportive, and I'm guessing again that maybe that's something you're familiar with, or that's something you at least could identify with.
Yeah, I think maybe the one that isn't, there is some, I think, a disconnect between Denise and Rachel, Molly Shannon.
Yeah.
You see the world down there, which is cold and stark and nothing. You know, it's all Pier 1 and like, or Pottery Barn and no family photographs and everything's white. And
I'm not saying they're not weird.
no. I think you can sense that she has a world that's very separate from her mom's. And I think when you see them, and I think we talked about that. I think she's relied on her sense of humor, and she has an alcohol issue, and I think, and you see her daughter's room upstairs filled with colors and patterns and photos and memories, and you know, and I think there is something that isn't talked about that is very clear that's present there. Maybe that isn't that supportive, and maybe they don't get each other. And then when you see them at the end in the bed, I think that was like a bit of closure to that relationship. And I think his parents are quite supportive. Yeah, sitting in weird. Yeah.
We're going to have people line up here if you want to start lining up for any questions from the audience, just so you know. 23 days sounds like a challenge, so maybe that's part of it, but for both of you, what was the most challenging aspect of this production? The first thing that comes to mind when I say that word, could be a single day, could be something overall, the challenge of this production.
I think it was just trying to not have it fall into any of the trappings of what people think an American high school movie would be, and obviously we were influenced by everything from John Hughes movies and other movies, but we just wanted this to be different in every way and sort of not be, a parody or a kind of cliche or a fake romanticized version of high school, and actually just try and capture what all the best coming of age movies do, which is just capture that feeling of what it's like to be at a certain place in your life before you get to the next place in your life. And that was I think, what it was all about in my mind.
Feel the same?
Yeah, I mean, one scene, if there's something specific that was quite hard, was our last day when the hospital scene. I had storyboarded this pre-production. It was timed out perfectly. I mean, everything was very specific and detailed, and that morning the animated film kind of came together. We were starting later that day. I time certain the shots, and we had them all on laminated Velcro, and nothing worked. Absolutely nothing worked. It just felt fake. It felt like it belonged to the beginning of the movie. That's quite formal and formal and organized, and this was not that. And so it was about, we had a great AD, Jonas Vaccaratelli, who I specifically asked, I just need I don't want to rush this last scene. You're so prepared and nothing works, and you just have to kind of stop and take a beat and maybe cry or something, and then figure out that it was just about to reimagine the whole sequence and just document it simply.
So then you focus more on her then? Because I love how much that sequence focuses on her eyes.
It was very simple. I think it all changed when I did one run through with the real nurse and the real doctor.
Okay.
So what's going to happen? And we had a real nurse in that hospital, and when you realize what was happening, you've been seeing it in your head the whole time, and then you realize how it really was and then when you hear the big shift in the plane, you realize that I didn't want to spend 2 hours on an insert in the way it was going to project a certain way, and then silhouettes of the nurses and the curtain. It was just too stylized, and it felt fake. And it wasn't as honest and it was as simply as just like documenting the entire sequence and staying on the faces, and using the Steadicam, which was more like a memory and perfect.
And we get that flare, there's that sort of weird flare as we were projecting, it kind of happened accidentally, and then we were ready to shoot, and suddenly we lost it.
Yeah.
Remember? And then we spent about 3 hours, and at this point it was like 4 in the morning. It was like the last day of shooting, everyone's exhausted, and luckily there's like 1,000 beds around because we were in an actual hospital, so all the crew members were all sleeping, and Alfonso was trying to find a flare for a couple of hours, and then we got the scene, but because we were actually playing the movie and the music live on set, which I think was, rather than compositing it any later, it really created that atmosphere. And the very last thing we did in the film, which was like probably 6 or 7 in the morning, which was after like our 1 20-hour day on this movie, and we just closed the door and we shot the last shot of just what you see on the wall, and Molly Shannon and everyone, we just sort of laid out on the floor in this tiny little hospital room in a real hospital and just watched it through silently for like 5 minutes, and all kind of teared up, and then that was a wrap.
But it was quite humbling to think you're so prepared and nothing. And it's the most important scene,
And they were, but it all comes together.
But then it was the right approach was nothing fancy, just staying on the faces,
Hi. First of all, again, I love the movie. One thing that struck me when I was watching the movie was the idea of Greg as a filmmaker, and almost it felt like Greg was the author of the film himself, like almost as if we were watching Greg make this movie for us. Was that something that crossed your mind when you were filming it, when you were directing it, like almost kind of thinking, how would Greg shoot this scene? I don't know.
Not exactly, but it was a memory. Now, very clear that the high school stuff had to be very hyper real. And when you have the flashback and you have you see we're in Braddock and there's Earl's house and it's bright yellow, and all that was heightened kind of reality memory. And her color was yellow, so you'll see that everywhere. That's a part of, even at the very end, he's writing. He has these yellow rubber bands on his watch. So there's a piece of her everywhere in his retelling. So there had to be. So there is a little bit of that, and then it gets quieter and still, as the movie progresses. But it it all had to have a handmade quality. It just shouldn't. Even at the very end, the original ending was a series of shots of her at different ages in the bedroom, and I didn't know how to do that. And two, if I pulled it off, would you need motion control? Would it be a little too VFX-y for an ending for a movie that was so handmade? So it was more about keeping something that felt tangible and real. And I don't think I ever thought of, certainly all the films within the film, the little shorts that they made, Ed Bursch and Nate Marsh did, all had to feel like they were handmade by two 17-year-olds. But the bigger movie maybe is an extension of that, but not consciously, I don't think.
All right, thank you.